Hi, good afternoon. My name is Leslie Polanco. Today we are going to be presenting our hot topic, which is charter schools in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our group is Renee, Coggins, myself, and Janel Richardson. We are going to be exploring everything related to charter schools and the adjustments they have had to make during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here is a quick overview of the questions we are exploring within our presentation. Our first question is how do charter schools differ from traditional schools? We're going to offer you a brief quick history. Minnesota was the first state to adopt public charter school legislation, and it also was the first to open a charter school in 1991. California was the second, following in 1992. I was surprised to see in the California Department of Education all of the different outlining characteristics of what a charter school is. The one I was most surprised with was that it provides vigorous competition within the public school system to stimulate continual improvements in all public schools. I found that very interesting as it sets up the platform to have charter schools be a direct competitor to our more traditional public school district model. Here we also have a map of California. There is currently a charter schools in 54 of our 58 counties in California. And charter schools must renew at least every 5 years by the school district or authorizer to ensure good academic results and that they are operating in a fiscally and operationally responsible manner. This opens up charter schools to operate on a year-to-year basis as if they are operating as a new school. Each year they have to set forth documentation that they are operating responsibly, and they are always subject to closure of their charter if they are not renewed, which oftentimes leaves their population of students without a format that would directly help or benefit them, since they are not they didn't do well at a traditional district school. Here we will look at how my charter schools differ in regards to the pandemic. We had the great opportunity to interview two administrators, one at Opportunities for Learning, which is a school I have recently become employed, and also we are looking at interviewing at iLead Online. It was interesting to see the responses from both administrators. They do share the same sentiment of how charter schools have been directly affected by funding, which has adversely affected their enrollment capacity due to limited resources. But we will further explore those characteristics regarding funding and enrollment further in our presentation. And here is our next presenter.
Hi, my name is Renee Coggins, and the first question I'm going to address is how has the pandemic impacted enrollment for charter schools? First of all, it's interesting to note that trends between 2014 and 2019 show an overall 0.8% decline in student enrollment statewide. Meanwhile, charter school enrollment grew almost 17% during that same time period. Next slide, please. But what happened when the pandemic hit? In the fall, more than 90% of California schools were not allowed to open their doors due to high rates of COVID-19, leaving districts to navigate longer-term distance learning plans after a rather chaotic attempt to do so in the spring. The abrupt shift in public education had enrollment soaring at online charters, which had been teaching via distance learning for more than a decade, with parents in search of experts in virtual instruction. Some programs found themselves with wait lists in the thousands of students, many more than they could financially support. California Connections Academy had to stop accepting new applications due to an unprecedented interest in the school, with nearly 9,000 families on their wait list, according to a spokesperson. That's more than the 6,000 some overall students enrolled in their program. Innovative Education Management, which operates 3 charter homeschools in the state, had 4,000 students on its wait list. April Lauren, head of California Virtual Academies, which also stopped accepting applications in July, said we're seeing families who would have never considered an online option. For them, they prefer to go with somebody who's been doing this for a long time, rather than their child being a guinea pig while teachers try to figure this out. Our teachers are not scrambling to figure out how to use Zoom or Google Classroom. They already know how to do that. So why was this a problem? Why couldn't charter schools simply expand their programs to embrace all these new enrollees? Well, the answer to those questions lies in our next focus question. How has state funding impacted charter schools during the pandemic? Next slide. Well, while charters are public, they have long been criticized for drawing students and the state dollars that accompany them from traditional schools. As state leaders watched this mass exodus, they decided that something must be done to protect funding for traditional public schools. Next slide. Funding for public schools in California is based on average daily attendance, or ADA, but anticipating that the coronavirus would create a turbulent and financially unstable year, the legislature agreed in June to fund schools this year at the same levels of student attendance as in 2019-20. On June 29th, 2020, 2 days before the start of the new fiscal year, Governor Newsom signed Senate Bill 98 into law. SB 98 is a 248-page trailer bill which provides various mandates relating to distance learning and minimum instructional minutes for the 2020-21 school year. However, SB 98 also includes the student defunding law, which stated that calculating funding apportionments to schools for this school year, they would use the average daily attendance from the 2019-20 school year rather than a school's current enrollment. This bill ensured that public schools wouldn't suffer financially from enrollment declines or challenges in tracking students during virtual learning. However, it proved devastating to California's growing charter schools. Sycamore Creek's executive director, Sarah Bach, said that without tuition revenue for its planned expansion, it would have to fund twice as many students at half as much funding. In response to this law, a lawsuit was filed in July by 4 California charter schools who charged that if funding did not adjust each year to reflect the number of students actually enrolled in each public school, then public schools with increasing enrollment would have fewer resources to serve more students. Well, in the face of this lawsuit, Democrats put together a fix to address this legitimate complaint that the state would not fund every child. Senate Bill 820 was passed in October. It appears to fund increased numbers of students at growing schools. Under its provisions, the state would fund higher enrollment based on either the projected number of students in a school's own 2020-21 budgets or on their enrollment figures as of October 1st, 2021. However, the bill stipulates that funding would be based on whichever figure is lower. So to understand this, think about a charter school that conservatively projected 400 new students in its 2021 budget turned into the state last spring. However, on October 1st, the school actually had 500 new students. Well, in normal years, school state funding would have followed those students. According to SB 820, the state will not pay for the additional students because the projected number of students in the school's budget was the lower amount than the actual number of students that eventually enrolled. Well, last spring, when school budgets for the upcoming year were being formulated, most people assumed that schools would be open and back to normal by the fall, and they planned accordingly. So charter schools that recruited students over the summer, while budgeting conservatively for the upcoming year, may very likely have been adversely affected. In addition, state lawmakers explicitly defunded new schools at online charter schools, which serve their students through distance learning tools. According to SB 820, non-classroom-based schools were expressly excluded from its provisions. Well, in response to SB 820, a new lawsuit was filed by 3 San Diego County charter school networks who said that as non-classroom-based programs, they were wrongfully denied state funding. These 3 charter networks together enrolled 2,000 new students, but didn't receive about $20.9 million in state funding they would have normally received for them. That suit, Reyes versus the state of California, was subsequently granted class action status so that it now represents all 308 of California's charter schools that provide online, homeschool, and other traditional learning. This is the first class action lawsuit involving charter schools in California's history. The 308 charter schools are called non-classroom-based charter schools because at least 20% of the learning occurs off campus. The schools often provide a range of virtual, at-home, and in-person instruction. Those schools enroll 195,000 students throughout our state and make up 29% of the state's charter schools. A court hearing for that case is scheduled for July 2nd. Here's our next presenter.
Hello there, my name is Janel Richardson. I'll be answering the next few questions. So the first one we're going to discuss is what adjustments did charter schools make in order to better serve students and families? Next slide, please. So during the pandemic, we see traditional schools and charter schools having to make some huge adjustments. One of the quotes that really stood out to me in the articles that I read was the percentage of families living without basic needs, like access to food, clothing, or secure housing, they jumped from 4% before COVID all the way to 40% in a matter of weeks. This is just an example of how our numbers grew so much for the needs that students would have. And some of those needs that we did research on were, social and emotional needs, tech support, connecting with the community, disability supports, and food distribution. So some of the things that charter schools did to make sure that these needs were taken care of is for social and emotional reach outs, they made sure to do surveys and weekly check-ins with families, make sure that they had access to wellness resources. Tech support, what was very interesting in some of the articles I read is that something that charter schools had done less in was providing hotspots. So they were at 10% where traditionals were at 30%. However, they did meet delivering devices such as Chromebooks equally likely with traditional schools. Connecting with the community. So this is something that charter schools are strong in prior to COVID, really working together with families and the community to be able to connect with them, if they are learning online. So this is something that they maintained and were easily adaptable to continue to do this during the pandemic. They have always worked in a flexible manner. So when the pandemic hit, it was very easy to be flexible and to be able to take care of those needs. As far as disability supports, immediately those had to switch to online. So that was a change for charter schools. They had to provide physical and occupational therapies for their disabled students online, but were very quick to do so. And then food distribution, charter schools were able to connect with community partners to make sure that those students or families were able to receive their food. Next slide, please. So the second thing we wanted to look at was how are charter schools engaging students during the pandemic? I think all of us are looking at how are we keeping students engaged. Next slide, please. It was really interesting. So I found two wonderful peer-reviewed articles through the University of La Verne, and they actually had compiled tons of different charter schools throughout California to gather data, statistical data, just kind of averaging out different ways or how they were engaging students. So one of the things that charter schools were expected to do is to provide real-time or live instruction. And this was actually noted to be much higher than traditional school districts. So they showed a 74%, where traditional school districts were at 47%. Their attendance also was showing to be a little bit stronger at 38% compared to the traditional 22%. And then, as stated before, the transition to distance learning was another article. Being able to keep students engaged seemed to be quite easy for charter schools because they've always, worked on a flexible manner. And so to be able to adjust to these families' needs or student needs or jump online, it was something that they had done in the past with adopting new models, strategies, curricula. So staff felt very comfortable doing so. One thing charter schools are very familiar with as well is doing internal assessments. So this is one way that charter schools could track their engagement of their students to make sure that they were retaining all of the information that they were learning, and to be able to do these. I know online, I Lead Online, for example, they do the internal assessments 3 times a year to make sure that the students are progressing. So maybe a traditional school was not as familiar. Maybe they, were doing state testing or testing in a traditional classroom, and to jump online and do these types of assessments were very easy for charter schools because they were familiar and they've been doing them the whole time. Charter schools adapted parent trainings. So this was one of in the articles, charter schools were training parents to be able to help their children be able to take these tests online. And you see a lot of times with charter schools, you want to have that parent involvement to make sure that the students are productive. And so enabling these types of parent trainings were very beneficial for charter schools, according to that article. All right, next slide, please. I just wanted to mention that 2 of these associations, or the California Charter School Association, in addition to the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, they both recommended that the best way to keep the students engaged in the charter school was to maintain and track contact by having advisory meetings or surveys, connecting with the family, weekly check-ins. That was for both of them. Those were best practices to make sure that they were being engaged, to check in with them. Implementing like a feedback loop, making sure they were completing surveys, checking in on their social and emotional well-being. And another thing that was really good was expanding the role of the school, rallied partners, vendors, funders to aid. So they really reached out to the community. So those were the 2 strongest ways of keeping students engaged during the pandemic. And next slide.
Hello, this is Leslie Polanco again. We are going to be looking at what impact might the pandemic have on the future of charter schools. Initially, I had a very different close to our presentation, but as we were compiling all of the information for our presentation, before the Education Committee in Sacramento, Bill AB 1316 was initiated in order to, their words exactly are to increase the quality of independent study programs offered to students by both school districts and charter schools. So under the guise of improving the quality of independent study programs, they put forth these restrictions that, if passed, charter schools would have to abide by. But it is very difficult to do so if you're an independent study program that does not have in-school instruction. Per the AB 1316 fact sheet sent out to all charters from the state of California, some of the bullet points that must be met if the bill passes is that enhancing safety requirements and improving the quality of services provided to students by vendor personnel, eliminating public education funding from paying for private religious education, which is funny to see this because charter schools are strictly to be non-denominational in any format. Additionally, eliminating public education funding from from creating parity in the audit of accounting and systems, basically creating much more transparent vision of everything that is funding with when it comes to charter schools. Unfortunately, it also restricts parent options in the state of California during the pandemic and beyond. It'll force many charter schools whose enrollment exceeds that of chartering district to continue service to the number in excess. So, for example, at the school I work at, which is Opportunities for Learning, our charter is governed by the Baldwin Park District, and it is a very small district. It consists of 3 schools whose enrollment is much smaller than ours. If this bill passes, it would have a direct impact on the student and the population that I work with. Our population is not a typical population, one that has thrived or did thrive at a district school. We have anything from adults, 18 to 19-year-olds reading at a 3rd grade level, and that is the main focus of our school. We do credit recovery, and so the question is, where would these students go if our school was forced to shut down? Because it does operate under an independent study format. So meeting the requirements set forth by Bill AB 1316 would be nearly impossible. So the bigger question is that as we close, and hopefully we've answered and addressed all the questions in our presentation, we're left with even more questions, unfortunately. It is not to say that all charter schools are perfect, nor are all district schools. However, there is particular populations being served. So what happens to those students? What happens to those children and those families? Whose needs are really being met when a charter school is faced to close? I thank you all for your time. We learned so much putting this presentation together, and thank you so much.